This video is not going to be about politics at all. I have other interests, and libertarianism and economics kind of have become the dominant interests in the last, I don't know, almost decade of my life, other than history. But I have a lot of other interests, and I hope that when I make this video, it doesn't lead to people being dismissive of my other views, but whatever I care about it, so not care about it, I find it interesting, so I'm going to make a video about it. And obviously the topic, which probably should be obvious in the title, is Bigfoot. I've always been interested in Bigfoot since, around the time I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I'm still interested in Bigfoot, and I mean, watching Monster Quest is one of my guilty pleasures, and I'm just going to be right up front, and I actually think that Bigfoot is real. Now, I realize that there's a chance that I'm wrong. It's possible that Bigfoot doesn't exist. There's a couple plausible alternative explanations, but it is my view that the claim that Bigfoot is fake is actually, I think people are too dismissive about it. I think there's actually more evidence out there that people are not integrating into their analysis, and that the best theory for the facts available is that Bigfoot is a real animal, and not that it's a series of hoaxes or mass delusion, although those are all interesting and actually probably contribute to part of it. It's a big topic, and I don't want to be, I'm not exactly sure if in this video I should just overview it all or make my case, or I guess I'll make my case. The number one thing to point out is that there is a fossil record of basically an animal that, for all intents and purposes, would be called Bigfoot. I mean, there were lots of apes and hominids besides humans, and one that for which there's a decent fossil record in China is a species known as Gigantopithecus, and the name kind of says it all. And the reconstructions of this animal, which I'm sure can't be perfectly done, are basically, you know, an 7, 8, 9 foot tall bipedal ape. And this is basically the description of Bigfoot. So even if there aren't any Bigfoots now, there used to be Bigfoots, and it wasn't all that long ago. I forget when, you know, you can never tell from the fossil record when something actually goes extinct, because you're never going to get the last fossil. But I guess the fossils of the animal dry up around, I probably should have looked this up, but I think 300,000 years ago. Maybe it's 1 million, I'm not sure. But that is very, very close to present, and it's possible that it did go extinct in wherever it was originally from, or wherever the main fossil beds are occurring. I mean, usually, it's my understanding that almost all the fossils they have for Gigantopithecus are teeth. As in, there's no place where you can go and actually look at a Gigantopithecus skeleton. I guess they have a jawbone, a lower jawbone, and they are able to extrapolate from that it's bipedal and about how big it would be. You can tell how it connects to the spine in the back. Although I guess your jaw wouldn't really attach to your spine. Anyway, I'm not an anthropologist, so I'm not for sure. But the consensus is it was a bipedal, very tall ape. And you know, most of the teeth come from certain areas in China, but it's possible it went extinct in those areas, and so there'd be no more fossils, but it's still extant. It still exists someplace else. Now, in terms of the evidence today, there's basically the most voluminous kind is the eyewitnesses, and I will admit that there's a lot of problems with eyewitness testimony. We don't know if people are telling the truth. Even if they are telling the truth, they can be mistaken. You can think that you've seen something when you haven't, and there's no way to really gain their perspective. You don't know what they actually saw. At least, you know, they can describe it to you, but there's just no. Now, when you watch the shows, like on Monster Quest, when you read the reports, some of them, many of them, sound very, very fishy. Many of them sound like this person either wants attention or they want to get a good laugh out of it. That's really common. Other times, the stories are so vague that they don't, yes, you saw something in the night, you don't know what it was. I mean, I saw one where they were investigating, like, the ape man of India, and there was a woman who said she was attacked by it at night, and they went and interviewed her, and at one point, he was asking to describe what it looks like, and he's like, well, was it hairy? And she's like, no, and, like, was it, Eventually he said, well, was there any indication at all that it was anything other than a person? And she's like, well, not really. And it's like, okay, well, what's the point? What's the point in thinking that was anything other than a person then? However, some of these people are polygraphed, said to be honest. Some of them are credible witnesses, as in outdoorsy people. Sometimes what they describe is too detailed to be passed off as a bear. And there's a high degree of uniformity in what they describe and where these, like, the sightings are concentrated in certain areas. There's kind of a one thing I know about people who like Bigfoot is they do, among the community that's pro-Bigfoot, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of really stupid arguments made for it. If you read a good book on it by an anthropologist is The Apes Among Us by Grover Krantz. If you ever watched some old documentaries from the 70s, he was interviewed a couple times. He's dead now, but he wrote a good book about it. But he pointed out, and you'll notice this on Bigfoot sites sometimes, that a lot of people like to trumpet that people cite Bigfoot all over the place, like in Mexico and in the United States and Australia and China and Vietnam and blah, blah, blah. And Krantz blindly observed that it's interesting these people think that by saying that there are sightings all over the place, this indicates it's more likely to be a real animal. He goes, well, really, if it's a totally unrealistic range to think of an animal living over such an enormous area and such different circumstances. An animal that lives in the Pacific Northwest is likely not going to live in the outback of Australia or the jungles of Vietnam. And what that actually suggests is that the distribution is not following any kind of animal home territory. It's really following where humans live, which would mean it's a human phenomenon, which I admit is possible. But there is definitely a cluster, and the thing is, it's clustered in areas that are not very populated, which would not make sense if it was just a human phenomenon. And also, about 9 out of 10 of them are night sightings. Now, humans at night, we can't see very well. We're actually not very active at night mostly, and so if an animal is active during both time periods, chances are there'll be 10 times more sightings during the day. And actually, people see deer more in the day than they see at night, but they're actually a nocturnal animal. And this suggests that they are a strictly nocturnal animal. But if it was just a human phenomenon, people would report seeing them, at any hours of the day. But beyond the eyewitness, there is actually physical evidence. Now, some of this has come in the form of hair. The hair evidence has never been conclusive, as far as I can tell, but there have been instances where they say, well, this hair is from an animal, it is real hair, and it does not belong to any known species. For sure that has happened. And that doesn't prove then that it came from a Bigfoot. It might have come from some kind of squirrel that we've not identified or whatever. I have heard some of them characterize it as the follicles being something akin to a cross between a human and an ape. But not being a folliculist, or whatever they call people who study hair follicles. I have no way of really knowing if you can really make that assertion. There's also been DNA samples taken, and my understanding is that these are always inconclusive. It's either contaminated. Once or twice I've heard claims made that, it's part ape, part human, sort of, but those sounded really dubious, so I'm not sure I put any stock in those. But the main physical evidence is the footprints. Now, it is possible to fake footprints. But some of the tracks are pretty amazing fakes, to the point where they demonstrate the anatomy of the foot that couldn't be duplicated just by putting a Bigfoot heel on your shoe, and also even including what they call dermal ridges, basically fingerprints. And if you look him up, there's a guy named Jimmy Chilcutt, and he was in the FBI, and he was like the FBI's main fingerprint analysis expert. And kind of an interesting guy. He got into fingerprinting apes. Zoos and circuses and research institutions wanted a way that they could positively identify chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans. Because you don't know. They don't know. They can't talk. You can't ask them what their name is, and they might look. There are certain physical traits, but they could change over time. And 20 years later, you might encounter a chip that got older. It looks different, and you don't know. So anyway, he started a program where he fingerprints chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas. And so he is like the world expert on hominid, although gorillas and chimps aren't hominids, I guess, on great ape fingerprinting. And he has analyzed some tracks, and he says these are, honest to God, these are real prints. The dermal ridges are dissimilar. They're I guess, human feet prints go across, apes go up and down, and Bigfoot ones that he's analyzed, they go diagonally, and also they are double the size. So, we're one of our dermal ridges might be, 3 microns across. These are 6 microns across. And this alone convinced him that it was a real animal. Another interesting thing about the footprints is I've seen them done statistical analyses on them where they measure them all. They go and they say, how long are all the known things? How wide are they? What's the breadth? What's the width of the heel? What's the break of the toe? And they plot them on a chart. And basically what you get for all of them is a bell curve. You get a couple on the top, a couple on the bottom, and a whole bunch in the middle. And they had a statistician look at these, and he said that these are consistent with a natural population of animals. It is unlikely that hoaxers would consistently, you'd have hoaxers that would make enough that are big and enough that are small and enough that are in the middle to make a bell curve. There's no reason to say that, to assume that hoaxers would be able to coordinate their hoaxing together enough to create that illusion of an actual population. Now, there are hoaxers, and hoaxers can be sophisticated. And I heard one researcher dismiss the fingerprint evidence because, somebody built a shoe that had a mid-tarsal break and was extra big, and then they found a way to copy a human fingerprints and then make the diagonal and then increase their size, which all this is technically possible. And then they walked around like in the middle of the mountains in Washington State, and somebody found it and made a cast. And that is possible, but I think that that's an awful lot of effort to go to for no discernible benefit. Hoaxers can be ingenious, and they can fake just about anything. But the reason that they go to all that trouble is because they want money, usually. And if there's no money trail, then hoaxing is less likely. A classic example is I remember watching a show where people in Pakistan were literally faking mummies. They were producing mummies with actual bodies in them that had been mummified along the Egyptian technique, and then they put artifacts in them to suggest. The one I saw, they were suggesting that it was Rodugina, one of the daughters of Xerxes, and they're trying to sell this for like $5 million. I mean, they actually had the renowned Egyptologist come and he goes, "This is actually mummified the way the Egyptians would do it, but they did carbon dating." Like, yeah, but whoever this was died in 1996. I also saw another one where there's an artifact that had the name either King David or King Solomon, I don't remember which one, who we don't have any artifacts at all directly attesting either of them. We're pretty sure that they existed, but we don't have a little bracelet that says King David on it, and this was a little bead or something that said that, and the age was right, and the ancient Hebrew was correct, and I mean the thing really looked real. But eventually they determined that it wasn't an original; it was an actual artifact. But then somebody who really knew ancient Arab or ancient Hebrew really well had actually carved in David or Solomon's name on there partially. They made it look old, so you couldn't see the whole thing. The idea being, all of a sudden you just take an old artifact, and then all of a sudden it becomes super valuable. Nobody ever made any money off of the dermal-ridged Bigfoot footprints. Nobody ever did, which then calls into question why someone would go to such extraordinary length. I mean, just to laugh about it now, I guess it's possible, but they're fooling the FBI expert, and they're fooling the statistician who puts it all together. So I would say that that's unlikely to be hoaxing. Krantz also points out that the number of tracks that are found, and the fact that most of them are never found probably, and the remoteness of them, he was estimating that if it was hoaxers, that it would be a $100 million a year industry of people going out and making fake Bigfoot tracks. And he goes, I find that very unlikely if they're not getting any money out of it. Now, the last piece of evidence, the most famous by far, the most tantalizing, is the Patterson footage, the video from 1967, I want to say, of a Bigfoot creature walking away. Now, the claim is, well, it's just a man in a suit or a woman in a suit, and this is far less plausible than it would seem. Basically, I've seen a number of analyses on this by Hollywood experts, current Hollywood experts, and everything I've heard is that within the Hollywood effects community and like the Jim Hensons and the people who really make high-tech costumes, including gorilla costumes, they've all seen the Patterson footage, and that's always kind of like the conspiracy theory that they always talk about. Like, do you think that Walt Disney made it, or do you think that Paramount Pictures, or do you think whoever, the big makeup artists of the past, do you think that they did it? No one's saying that they know, because they admire the work, if that's the case. Basically, if you watch the video closely, there is evidence of movement of flesh on bone, as in it's not a fur suit just over a person. It's actually, and there's musculature, there's ripples of musculars, and the muscles move, consistent with anatomy, and basically, and I'm not a special effects artist expert, but the testimony I've heard is that today it would be very, very hard to make a suit like that. It would be very, very, very hard to make a suit like that, but it would be possible. However, the materials that they would use to make a suit like that, there's some kind of flex fiber that they make that you can graft some kind of faux musculature and put this stuff over it, and it will stretch or whatever. He goes, that didn't exist until the 80s. But all this is kind of me talking about a technical subject that I don't know a ton about. But if I come out of the strictly Bigfoot arena for a second, a film that I like, it's not one of my favorites, but I like, is Planet of the Apes. And I kind of, when I was a kid, went through a Planet of the Apes stage. If you watch a documentary on Planet of the Apes, one of the central things that they discuss there is the makeup. Basically, people wanted to make the movie, but the studios were reluctant because they said, look, the main characters are going to be apes and orangutans or whatever, and it has to be, this isn't a kid's movie, this is a serious movie. It would be one thing if it was Mickey Mouse, whatever, it doesn't have to look that real then. This is supposed to be a serious movie. So we have to take the actors serious. We have to have convincing makeup here. And they basically got the best, I forget his name, but he was the most acclaimed makeup artist in Hollywood, and he had to up his game to get what you have in Planet of the Apes, and I believe he won an Academy Award for it. Well, if you look at the Planet of the Apes, the quality of the costuming there is pathetic compared to that in the Patterson footage. And the Patterson footage is 2 years older than Planet of the Apes. So the allegation that Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson, the people who saw the film, that they were able to best, literally by decades, the best that Hollywood could produce is very, very unlikely. Walt Disney at the time said that he could not have faked it, and he had a major film studio at the time. And I mean, when you ask the question related to Bigfoot, the answer, if you ask someone, would it have been possible to fake that costume? People's answers are jaded whether they think Bigfoot is real, because if they don't think Bigfoot's real, then they're just going to say, since Bigfoot's not real, then it must not be possible. That's why I like the Planet of the Apes line of argument, because you just look at the Planet of the Apes, and you look at the Patterson footage, and the Patterson footage is orders of magnitude higher quality than what's in Planet of the Apes. And so and Planet of the Apes is objectively, without question, considered like top of the line, state of the art, best that Hollywood could do 2 years later. Now, the Gimlin and Patterson are kind of not what I would consider the best. I wish that they're a little shady. Let me just say that. But there's evidence that even if they are shady, that they didn't fake it. A couple reasons. One, the suit has never been produced. A number of people have claimed that they were the people in the suit, but if a number of people have claimed it, that means that at least some of them, and possibly all of them, are lying about it. And if they did it, why don't they produce the suit? And why don't they reproduce the video? If they were able to produce it in 1967, they should just do another Patterson footage. And there's evidence that Bob Gimlin, I think it was Bob Gimlin, it might have been Patterson, actually believed that he could make money if he could produce another Bigfoot video. And towards the end of his life, he needed money really, really bad. He was broke. He had lots of bills. I think he got cancer and he couldn't pay his medical bills. So if he was able to fake it before, why didn't he just fake another one and cash in? He never did. I mean, if he was a hoaxer, he could have made more money off of it, right? And he failed to do this. So to me, this makes the idea that it's a hoax very, very, very unlikely. And you juxtapose that with the fact that there's a fossil record of basically an identical animal, or as far as we can tell, an identical animal. And with the historical, you've got all the Native Americans. That's a lot of times dismissed. And it is true that like Native Americans imbue a lot of spiritualism and like magic or whatever, but they do that with all their animals that they describe, wolves and bears. They'll describe magical property. They'll have bears talking or whatever. Obviously that's ridiculous, but that doesn't mean bears are fake. And I've had anthropologists have talked to some of these native peoples, the Indians people. They're Indians. This kind, not this kind. My hair is too high. I can't see my fingers. And they will distinguish and say, yeah, it's not a mythological being. It's like an animal. It's like a dog, bear, mountain lion, Sasquatch, in the one language that it's become common to say. So there. I think it's real. Tell me I'm wrong. I mean, it is problematic that there isn't a body. That's what we need to have proof is a body. My claim here isn't that there's proof that it exists, just that, in my opinion, the theory that best fits the facts is that it's not a combination of hoaxes and delusions and misidentifications, although all of those things happen, but that it's actual sightings of an animal, a real animal. I think an exceptionally rare one. If it is real, I'd want to really study it because it's very good at hiding itself. Although that is not. People make it sound like it's impossible. That's not impossible. Gorillas and panda bears weren't discovered until like the late 1800s. And, the first panda bear was discovered in like 1860. The Chinese talked about it, and Europeans said it was impossible. Panda bears are retarded, slow-moving bears with no camouflage, right? They just sit around eating bamboo all day. And after the first one was killed, there was a big craze to go out and get another one. And it took almost 50 years before another one was ever seen or captured. Same thing with gorillas. They were discovered in the late 1800s, but very recently they've just recently discovered, oh, there's just a whole bunch of them in the jungles we didn't know about. Huge populations that we did. Now, granted, the Congo is a lot less inhabited than Washington State, but there are basically totally isolated regions in Washington State. I'm just citing that. They're in places in North America. And if this is a really intelligent animal, and I'm not saying like a mystical, supreme being, alien, human intelligence, but a very timid, intelligent, nocturnal animal that makes a point to avoid humans and has heightened senses, smell, hearing, it's plausible that they could avoid humans at will. And as such, the fact that there are people out there doesn't prove that they'd be seen all that often. People that say, why isn't a hunter shot one? Well, if they're nocturnal, hunters don't hunt at night, and even if they did, they'd have a hard time shooting something. But that's what I actually would joke with one of my friends that we would go out, because he lives in Washington State. If I have any subscribers in Washington State, by the way, or out in the Pacific Northwest, I'd love to hear what you think about this. Just going out and actually hunting the damn thing. Grover Krantz specifically says we need to do this. We need to kill one and analyze it. He even goes. He suggested that you drive around on old logging roads with high beams on in a pickup truck with a guy in the back with a rifle, a big ass rifle, and you shoot it. And then he's like, try and get the whole body. If you can't get the body, cut off the head. If you can't get the head, cut off the arms and legs. He's going back the parts that would be the most important for science. I think that would be so awesome. It's one of my fantasies is to kill Bigfoot and then have it named after me. Lynthionosaurus. Lynthionopithecus. That would be it, yeah. I'd probably have to use my real name. My family would get pissed if I named it after my YouTube account name. But anyway, I hope this doesn't totally discredit me in terms of political philosophy. I don't believe in the Loch Ness Monster, if anybody's asking, or just about anything else, but I've always been more compelled, and I admit, to a certain degree, it's emotional. I just think it's a cool idea that there'd be such an amazing animal alive, but I think it's real. I'd say prove I'm wrong, but you can't really prove a negative, but whatever. This is a fun video, so prove I'm wrong.